deep in one of the wildest jungles in Southeast Asia, a rare military exchange took place. A group of elite Chinese soldiers arrived in the Philippines expecting tough training, but nothing could prepare them for the reality of Filipino jungle survival. What started as a routine exercise soon turned into one of the most shocking experiences of their lives, challenging everything they thought they knew about endurance, discipline, and nature. China is known for intense military drills, from icy lake plunges to long-distance endurance tests. Many Chinese soldiers believed Filipino jungle training would be difficult, but manageable. They assumed their physical strength and strict discipline would carry them through. They were wrong. The Filipino jungle demanded something different: instinct, silence, and understanding of an environment that seemed alive and unpredictable at every step. The moment the Chinese soldiers stepped off their transport vehicles, they sensed something unusual. Mist clung to the trees, thick and heavy. Insects buzzed loudly, birds shrieked, and unseen creatures rustled nearby. One soldier whispered that it felt like the jungle was watching him. A Filipino Scout Ranger smiled and replied, "It is." The Chinese soldiers didn't yet understand how true that was. Training began with no introduction, no warm-ups, and no warning. The Filipino soldiers simply vanished into the trees. The Chinese soldiers looked around in confusion. Moments later, the Filipinos reappeared silently behind them, without breaking a single twig. The Chinese soldiers were stunned. They realized immediately that this training wasn't about strength. It was about learning to move like a shadow in a living, breathing forest. As they continued, the Chinese soldiers struggled to adjust. The ground was slippery, the mud deep, and every step seemed to announce their presence. Meanwhile, the Filipino soldiers moved effortlessly, stepping lightly over roots and avoiding branches that could snap. The forest seemed to welcome the Filipinos, while resisting every move the Chinese soldiers made. It was their first taste of how unforgiving the jungle could be. Hours passed and exhaustion quickly set in. Sweat poured from their uniforms as the humidity drained their energy. When the Filipino instructors finally paused, the Chinese soldiers expected a break. Instead, they received a lesson in survival. The Scout Rangers showed how to gather clean drinking water from bamboo and vines. The Chinese soldiers watched in disbelief as fresh water flowed from plants they barely recognized. When the Chinese soldiers tried the technique themselves, they failed repeatedly. Some vines were dry, others produced bitter liquid, and a few were unsafe to drink. The Filipino soldiers explained that identifying the right plant could be the difference between life and death. This wasn't textbook knowledge. It was generational wisdom from people who had lived in these jungles for centuries. Then came the insects. The Chinese soldiers faced biting ants, swarming mosquitoes, and leeches that clung silently to their skin. One soldier panicked when he found a leech on his neck, but a Filipino ranger calmly removed it and continued walking. "If that scares you," he said, "wait until night." The Chinese soldiers couldn't tell if he was joking, but the fear in their eyes was real. Nightfall was even more terrifying than they imagined. The jungle became pitch black, with no moonlight to guide them. Strange animal calls echoed through the darkness. The Chinese soldiers gripped their weapons tightly, unsure what lurked beyond the thick shadows. The Filipino soldiers, however, remained relaxed. They had grown up with these sounds and knew which ones were harmless and which ones warned of danger. Setting up camp proved difficult. The Chinese soldiers placed tents in unsafe locations, left food scraps exposed, and struggled to start smokeless fires. The Filipino Rangers corrected each mistake with ease, explaining how small errors could expose a unit's position to enemies or attract dangerous animals. By midnight, the Chinese soldiers were exhausted and sleep-deprived, while the Filipinos remained alert and calm. At dawn, the real challenges began. Navigation training required moving through the jungle without maps or GPS. Filipinos used the sun, tree growth patterns, and natural signs to find direction. The Chinese soldiers were completely lost within minutes, repeatedly circling back to the same location. A scout ranger reminded them, "Here, the forest decides if you go home." The message was both simple and frightening. Food gathering came next. The Filipino soldiers easily found edible plants, caught fish, and set traps. The Chinese soldiers struggled again. They misidentified poisonous fruits, slipped into mud pits, and set noisy traps that scared animals away. Frustration built quickly. But the Filipinos offered patience instead of criticism. They explained that success in the jungle required humility more than strength. The third day introduced a simulated rescue mission. The Chinese soldiers had to locate a hidden Filipino ranger acting as an injured soldier. The environment worked against them. Uneven terrain broke their formation. Snapping branches gave away their location, and they missed natural clues left behind. Hours passed with no success. Sweat, hunger, and exhaustion took a visible toll on the team. Meanwhile, the Filipino Rangers completed the same mission in less than half an hour. When the Chinese unit returned defeated, they were shocked by the difference. One Chinese officer admitted they underestimated both the environment and the Filipino soldiers. But the Rangers weren't trying to humiliate them. They wanted the Chinese soldiers to understand that jungle survival required an entirely different mindset. By the fourth day, improvement finally began. The Chinese soldiers slowed their pace, listened more closely, and observed their surroundings. They noticed broken leaves, distant water sounds, and subtle animal movements. Their steps became lighter, their breathing steadier. They were no longer fighting the jungle. They were learning to adapt to it. The Filipino Rangers nodded with approval. The Chinese soldiers successfully built low-smoke fires, gathered water without mistakes, and even caught fish using traps they had previously failed to master. The transformation was obvious. The once frustrated soldiers now understood the importance of working with the environment instead of against it. The Filipino soldiers praised their determination and discipline, noting that few foreign units adapted this quickly. The final challenge was a silent march through a dense jungle pass. Filipino Rangers were stationed along the route, ready to mark any detected soldiers with paint. The Chinese soldiers moved cautiously, applying every lesson they learned. Soft steps, careful footing, controlled breathing, and avoiding dry leaves. The forest grew quiet as they advanced, blending into the shadows like the Rangers themselves. When they emerged at the end of the trail, only one soldier had been marked. This result shocked both sides. Proof that the Chinese soldiers had truly absorbed the Filipino jungle methods. The Filipino instructors congratulated them sincerely, recognizing the hard work behind the achievement. The Chinese soldiers felt an unexpected sense of pride in overcoming such a difficult test. As the training concluded, both groups gathered to exchange reflections. The Chinese soldiers confessed that Filipino jungle training was far more challenging than anything they had experienced. They admitted their surprise at how skillfully the Filipino soldiers navigated dangers that outsiders rarely survived. Their respect for the Scout Rangers grew immensely, and many expressed a desire to return for further training. The Filipino soldiers explained that their skills were built from generations of living, hunting, and fighting in the jungle. Indigenous tribes, farmers, and warriors contributed knowledge that shaped modern Filipino military techniques. It wasn't about technology or equipment. It was about understanding the land intimately. They emphasized that the jungle rewarded respect and punished arrogance. One Chinese officer asked what the true secret to surviving the Filipino jungle was. A Scout Ranger smiled and replied, "You don't survive it. You learn to live with it." The simplicity of that message struck the entire Chinese team. It revealed that jungle survival was more philosophical than physical, more mental than tactical. When news of this training reached military circles around the world, many were shocked. People believed China's military could adapt to any environment. But the Filipino jungle proved that even elite units could be humbled. The story spread across countries, highlighting the unexpected strength and deep-rooted knowledge of Filipino soldiers who rarely received global attention. What surprised observers most wasn't the difficulty of the training, but the reaction of the Chinese soldiers. Instead of feeling embarrassed, they openly praised the Filipinos. They described Scout Rangers as some of the most skilled jungle fighters on Earth, quiet, intelligent, and impossibly resourceful. They returned home eager to share the lessons they learned. The experience changed their understanding of warfare and survival. They learned that advanced weapons and large numbers meant little in a jungle that could swallow entire units. They discovered that true strength came from adaptability, patience, and knowledge passed through generations. The Filipino soldiers had mastered a world that outsiders barely understood. In the end, the Chinese soldiers didn't just complete Filipino jungle training. They were transformed by it. They arrived confident, expecting a routine exercise. They left humbled, deeply respectful, and forever changed by the jungle that challenged them at every turn. And that is why their reaction shocked everyone who heard the story.